I've always enjoyed driving. There's something almost comforting about the hum of the engine under the floorboards, the soft buzz of tires against the highway, and the wide open horizon that seems to stretch out forever. It's the reason I'd worked my way through a handful of trucking jobs. Box trucks for small companies, 18-wheelers for major retail chains, you name it. But nothing prepared me for the position I hold now as a fuel tanker driver for an isolated facility in the middle of nowhere. The day I signed that contract, I had no idea how bizarre my life would become. When I tell people I drive a fuel tanker, they imagine the usual, hauling gas, diesel, or industrial chemicals across long distances. And they'd be half right. The tanker itself is a standard model, about the size you'd see at truck stops around the country. It has the usual safety features, the giant cylindrical container on the back, and a cab that doubles as my temporary home. But there's something about my cargo that defies explanation. Something that urges me to follow the peculiar rules set by the company with unwavering loyalty. Even though these rules seem strange, the more I experience, the more I realize they're the only reason I'm still breathing. After years of working for smaller outfits, I was on the verge of running out of options. I'd grown tired of jobs with erratic hours, minimal pay, and zero benefits. So, when a friend mentioned that some private company was hiring fuel tanker drivers at nearly double the standard wage, I jumped at the chance. I left a voicemail for the number he provided, got a call back within a few days, and went through a surprisingly short interview process. No grueling background checks, no typical orientation videos, just an immediate job offer. They told me I'd be transporting specialized fuel to remote facilities. I'd be responsible for following any instructions sent to me through a dedicated, password-protected device they issued. The contract was thick, full of legal jargon, but I skimmed until I found the salary and benefits. Those alone were enough to make me sign on the dotted line. "I promise you," said my new manager, a quiet individual dressed in a dark suit that seemed a bit too formal for a trucking company. "This job is straightforward if you abide by our rules. Do you think you can follow instructions to the letter?" I said yes before I'd even asked what the rules were. If it meant better pay and stable work, I'd do it. On my first day, I was handed a single sheet of paper. Never stop at a rest area or gas station without prior clearance. If the fuel gauge on the tanker flickers or jumps unexpectedly, pull over safely and contact dispatch immediately. Never drive past 3 a.m. no matter how close you are to the destination. No explanations were provided. I asked the manager why these rules existed, but the only response was, "We have our reasons. If you value your safety, follow them." It sounded theatrical, almost like something out of an old horror film, but I had no reason to doubt them. A job was a job, right? My initial run started calmly. I left the company's main lot around noon, towing the tanker along a winding road that led out of the city. The instructions said to drop the cargo off at a large industrial building set deep in the desert. The drive was uneventful at first, with rolling landscapes that transitioned from green fields to arid plains as I progressed. Then, in the late afternoon, my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped, startled that they were contacting me directly. The text read, "Reduce speed by 10 miles per hour." There was no explanation. I checked the speedometer and slowed down. Only a few minutes later, I rounded a bend and saw a pileup. Several vehicles were blocking both lanes. Emergency responders were just arriving, but the entire scene was chaotic, with tow trucks and flashing lights everywhere. If I had maintained my original speed, I would have been caught in the mess. Was that just a lucky guess on the dispatcher's part? Or did they know something I didn't? I continued, and the sun slipped below the horizon. The desert sky took on muted shades of orange and pink, then faded to deep blue. I was approaching the remote turnoff that would take me to the facility. That's when my tablet pinged again. "Proceed to location. Do not stop for any reason." It might sound like your typical guidance from a dispatcher, but there was an edge to it that made me uneasy. Sure enough, about 10 miles later, I spotted a small roadside rest area with a sign boasting clean restrooms and a diner. Usually, that'd be a good place to stretch my legs. But I had direct orders not to stop anywhere without clearance. Despite a growing urge to get out and walk around, I resisted. Soon enough, the rest area receded in my mirrors. By the time I reached the facility, the place was enveloped in darkness. The security gates opened on their own as though they had been expecting me, and I drove the tanker into a massive hangar. The staff directed me to park on a marked platform. They had me leave the cab while they handled some sort of inspection. I couldn't help but notice the thick smell of chemicals in the air. It burned my nostrils, though they assured me it was just part of the fueling process. Once they finished, a stern individual with an identification badge told me I was free to rest in an on-site dormitory. As I walked away, I heard a strange hissing sound. I turned back to see the staff hooking up a series of hoses to the tanker, each marked with warnings. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something about the place felt wrong, but I told myself it was just late and I was tired. A few successful trips later, I was beginning to adjust to the quiet. The desert routes became familiar, and I could predict when the dispatch might send random instructions. However, I was growing more curious about the cargo itself. Why were we so secretive? Why was the facility always guarded by staff wearing protective gear? One night, driving under a clear sky, my eyes flicked to the tanker's fuel gauge. It was dropping faster than normal, then jumping back up. At first, I thought it was a wiring issue, maybe a faulty sensor. But the contract's second rule popped into my mind. If the fuel gauge flickers or jumps unexpectedly, pull over safely, and contact dispatch immediately. I found a wide shoulder on the road and slowly brought the tanker to a halt. My radio beeped before I even reached for my phone. A calm voice on the other end asked, "Where are you?" I read off my GPS coordinates. "Understood?" The voice continued. "Remain inside the vehicle. Keep all doors locked. Do not exit until we arrive." Those last words made me grip the steering wheel tighter. There was no explanation, just a clear demand. So I sat there, hazard lights on, waiting. Minutes stretched like hours. The desert wind buffeted my cab, causing the tanker to rattle slightly. A few times I thought I heard tapping on the metal hull behind me, but it might have been loose pebbles blowing across the road. Eventually, a pair of unmarked trucks arrived. Their headlights were off until they were nearly on top of me. Several individuals in protective suits emerged, carrying equipment I couldn't identify. One of them motioned for me to roll down my window, but only by a few inches. They explained they were going to repair the gauge. Then, in hushed voices, they told me I might feel a bit of a rumble from the tanker. That's when I heard a strange grinding noise. It sounded like an engine revving, but deeper, almost organic, if that makes any sense. A few moments later, the men in suits gave me the thumbs up, packed up their gear, and left as quickly as they'd come. My radio crackled again. "You're clear to proceed. Please follow your original route." No apologies, no clarifications, just a calm instruction to keep going. Shaken, I drove off into the night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something alive was in that tanker, something that required more than a mere mechanical fix. Eventually, rule number 1 started to weigh on me. The isolation of my routes, the secrecy around the cargo, and the strange messages from dispatch were pushing me to my limits. I needed a moment of normalcy, maybe a cup of coffee at a rest-stop diner. The trouble was, I didn't have prior clearance. But still, curiosity tugged at my mind. One evening, I planned my route meticulously. I knew there was a large rest area about an hour down the highway, complete with a trucker's lounge, showers, and a small convenience store. I reasoned with myself, if I snuck in and out quickly, would my employer ever know? The dispatcher rarely gave me instructions unless something out of the ordinary was happening. As I neared the rest area, I noticed a large digital sign announcing, "Open 24 hours." My phone and tablet remained silent. No warnings, no last-minute texts demanding I keep driving. So I flipped on my right blinker and pulled in. The parking lot was nearly empty, with only a few big rigs lined up in the corner. As I stepped out, the desert air felt cool on my skin. Inside, the atmosphere was typical of an all-night diner. The smell of coffee, the hum of fluorescent lights, and a lone server wiping down a counter. I ordered a coffee and took a seat, enjoying a moment away from the claustrophobic confines of my cab. That's when the lights started to flicker. The server sighed and mentioned they'd been having electrical issues. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling oddly uneasy. Something about the flickering lights reminded me of the tanker's gauge. I tried to ignore it, but a buzzing sound overhead intensified with each flicker of fluorescent tubes. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. I nearly spilled my coffee. The message on the screen read, "Exit immediately. Return to your vehicle. Drive away." I looked around. Nothing seemed obviously wrong, just a tired server and a well-worn diner. Still, the message was clear. I got up, left some money on the table, and headed back to the truck. As I walked, I caught a glimpse of movement by the corner of the lot. It was dark, but I thought I saw a shape standing near the tanker, tall and still. I quickened my pace, heart pounding. Before I could approach, my phone buzzed again. "Do not engage, leave now." Ignoring the creeping dread, I climbed into the cab, turned the engine over, and pulled out onto the highway. I glanced in my side mirror and saw that shape vanish into the shadows. What was it doing near my tanker? Had it been there the whole time? I didn't want to think about it. The next time I returned to the company lot, I expected to be reprimanded. I'd broken the cardinal rule about not stopping without clearance, but nobody said a word. The manager simply handed me a new route assignment and told me to head out. No scolding, no mention of extra instructions. Still, I felt an undercurrent of tension. The staff spoke in low tones. One of them stared at me as if trying to gauge my reactions. Once I was alone in my cab, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Something about my unauthorized stop must have set off alarm bells, but the fact that they weren't punishing me was almost worse, like they were silently acknowledging that I'd nearly stumbled into trouble, and they were giving me a second chance. Over the next few runs, everything seemed to return to routine. Dispatch would text or radio with minor adjustments. I'd complete my deliveries, and I'd sign the paperwork. Yet, a nagging feeling persisted. What was so special about the fuel I was transporting? How could it cause the gauge to flicker for reasons other than mechanical failure? And more importantly, what would happen if I ever broke the rules again? One night, I was behind schedule due to a severe storm. The roads were slick, visibility was poor, and I found myself inching along under the relentless pounding of rain. By the time I made it through the worst of the storm, it was nearly 2 a.m. According to Rule 3, I should never drive past 3 a.m., but I was close to my destination. I told myself I'd make it if I drove just a little faster. Big mistake. At 2:30 a.m., the tanker's gauge dipped wildly, then swung back up. I knew what that meant. I had to pull over and call dispatch, but the storm had flooded the shoulders. The desert roads were muddy, and I was wary of getting stuck. So I pressed on, convincing myself I could find a safer spot. 2:45 a.m. The gauge flickered again. My heart pounded. I could feel an almost tangible sense of pressure, like the air was charged with static. The phone was silent, offering no instructions. I checked the clock on the dashboard. 2:56 a.m. My palms were clammy on the steering wheel. 2:59 a.m. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The tanker rattled in an odd rhythm, almost like it had its heartbeat. My headlights illuminated nothing but darkness and flickers of rain. I kept telling myself I just needed to make it one more mile to a known wide turnout. 3 a.m. The moment the numbers on the clock changed, the cab's headlights dimmed for a split second, as if a surge had run through the entire vehicle. Then, a deep vibration rolled through the tanker, forcing me to grip the wheel tightly. A loud thud came from behind the cab. It wasn't the sound of rocks or rain. It was more like something large had slammed into the tanker walls. A new text from dispatch flashed on my screen. "Stop the vehicle immediately. My mind spun. The road had no good shoulder, but I was in no position to argue. Carefully, I eased the tanker onto the muddy side of the highway, ignoring the possibility of getting stuck. The moment I put the truck in park, a sense of dread washed over me. I waited. The rain hammered down and thunder boomed overhead. Then, out of nowhere, the engine died. My phone lost its signal. I tried the radio. Nothing but static. I sat there, each second feeling heavier than the last. A faint glow appeared in my side mirror, growing steadily. Eventually, I realized it was a set of headlights. The vehicle approached slowly, then parked behind me with its hazards on. Two figures in protective suits stepped out, carrying large flashlights that cut through the darkness. They approached the passenger side door and gestured for me to unlock it. One carefully slid in, dripping water onto the rubber mat. "Remain calm," the figure said in a measured tone. It was hard to tell, but the voice sounded almost robotic through the mask. "We're going to stabilize the tanker. Do not leave the vehicle. Don't look out of your windows. Is that clear?" I nodded, heart pounding. The figure in the passenger seat reached under the dashboard, fiddling with the wiring. The engine sputtered, then roared back to life. As the headlights reignited, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. For a moment, the reflection showed something large and dark moving along the side of the tanker. Then, a flash of lightning lit the area, and I saw nothing but the swirling rain. The figure in the passenger seat spoke again. "You're going to follow our escort to a safe location. Keep your eyes on the road. Do not deviate from our speed." I did as instructed. Their vehicle led the way, hazard lights flickering like a beacon. We traveled for what felt like hours, though my dashboard clock indicated just 20 minutes. Eventually, they guided me onto a narrow service road that ended at a covered structure. Once inside, the structure lit up with harsh overhead lamps that revealed polished floors and a domed roof. It looked more like a bunker than a garage. The passenger hopped out, beckoning me to wait. The pair of them began circling the tanker, scanning its hull with some sort of device that emitted a faint green glow. I couldn't shake the impression they were checking for signs of something alive in there. When they finished, one of them returned to the cab window. "We've contained the situation," they announced, handing me a small slip of paper. "In the future, do not drive past 3 a.m. This is your official warning." I took the paper, feeling relief mixed with lingering fear. Before I could say anything, they directed me to park the tanker at a designated spot, and then provided a pickup truck for me to use. They said they'd handle the rest of the delivery. I accepted, desperate for a moment of peace. I spent the next day resting at a small motel near the facility. I tried to process everything that had happened. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. The cargo wasn't normal, and the rules weren't arbitrary. There was a reason we weren't allowed to drive after a certain time, a reason the company acted so swiftly whenever the gauge flickered, and a reason they didn't want us stopping anywhere without clearance. Late that evening, I spotted a fellow driver who worked for the same company, checking into a nearby room. I caught his eye, and he nodded in recognition. We ended up sitting by the motel's vending machines, making small talk. Eventually, I mustered the courage to ask about the rules. He looked around to ensure no one was listening. "I've seen things," he whispered. "Sometimes, when you break the rules, you notice the tanker moving on its own, like something is shifting inside. I only saw it once, in my side mirror, and I haven't broken the rules since." He paused, searching my face. "I don't know what they put in there, but it behaves like it's alive. Maybe it's some sort of experimental fuel, or maybe it's something else entirely. All I know is that the rules are there for a reason. If you push them, you'll find out too late." That conversation stuck with me. I wanted to press him for more details, but he seemed genuinely frightened. I couldn't blame him. The memory of that shape I saw near the tanker at the rest area, and the thud I heard after 3 a.m. haunted me. I decided it was best not to pry. Some secrets are better left alone. Things carried on smoothly for a while, at least on the surface. The storms passed, and I kept a strict eye on the clock, always planning my routes to avoid driving past 3 a.m. I also resisted every urge to stop without clearance, no matter how appealing the roadside attractions were. Then, I was assigned a different route, one that led deeper into the desert, far from any recognizable highways. The instructions seemed straightforward, but the distance was longer than usual. From the start, I felt uneasy. I made sure to leave early enough so that I'd arrive well before the cutoff. But partway through, a traffic incident blocked the main road. The local authorities directed me onto a detour, and before I knew it, my GPS predicted I'd arrive just minutes before 3 a.m. A wave of apprehension washed over me, recalling that dreadful night in the storm. I fought to maintain composure, telling myself I could still make it. The cargo didn't show any gauge fluctuations, and dispatch was silent. Maybe luck was on my side this time. Yet as I pressed on, the desert roads seemed to stretch longer than they should, and each passing mile felt heavier on my nerves. With 15 minutes to spare, I spotted the facility's gate in the distance. Relief washed over me. Maybe I'd finally outsmarted the clock. But then the tanker's gauge flickered. My heart sank. It dipped once, twice, then steadied. I hoped it was a false alarm. The final approach was a straight shot down a fenced-in road. I could see lights on at the facility, shining like a beacon. With 10 minutes left, the gauge flickered again, and the tanker shuddered. I tapped the brake, feeling that familiar dread creep up my spine. Dispatch sent a single text. "Keep going. Do not stop until you reach the gate." I complied, pushing the truck to a cautious speed, heart hammering. The tanker rattled, and the road seemed to twist beneath me in the darkness. Just as I reached the gates, the clock hit 2:59 a.m. Security lights swept over my windshield, and the large doors began to open, revealing a hangar-like building. I parked inside at 3 a.m. exactly. The tanker's gauge jerked one last time, then died. A team of technicians rushed forward, hooking up the usual hoses. They motioned for me to exit and head to a debriefing area. My knees felt weak as I stepped down from the cab. The moment the hoses latched on, I heard a muted growl or rumble. I couldn't tell if it was machinery or something else entirely. Either way, I was certain I never wanted to find out. They let me rest in a small break room while they tended to the tanker. A short while later, the manager entered. He looked grave but offered a polite nod. "It seems you made it right on time," he said. "We appreciate that." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. I was too fatigued, both mentally and physically, to say much. "Your performance has been satisfactory," he continued. "We expect you'll keep following the rules as you have been. Some shipments are more volatile than others." I swallowed hard, absorbing his words. Volatile. That was one way to describe it. But I knew that term didn't fully capture the sinister presence I sensed in that tanker. Before leaving, the manager gave me a final piece of advice. "Don't overthink it. Focus on safe driving and the rules. You'll have a long career here if you do." And that was that. I was dismissed, free to return to my life until the next assignment. On the drive home, I replayed the events in my mind. The cryptic messages, the protective suits, the flickering gauge, and the possibility that something inside that tanker was far from inanimate. My conclusion was simple. The rules are the only reason I'm still alive. Never stop at an unapproved location. If there's an issue with the gauge, contact dispatch without hesitation. And above all, never drive past 3 a.m. I still don't know exactly what I'm hauling. Maybe it's some groundbreaking new energy source. Or perhaps it's something far beyond my comprehension. Whatever it may be, I've learned enough to realize that curiosity and complacency can be perilous companions. The rules, as strange as they are, serve as my life raft in a sea of unknown dangers. So here I am, continuing to accept route assignments, following every directive, and adhering to the schedule with religious fervor. My phone still buzzes at odd times, instructing me to slow down or reroute on a whim, and I never question why. If the gauge flickers, I don't hesitate to pull over and wait for the suited team to arrive. And the moment the clock inches toward 3 a.m., I make certain that the tanker is parked safely, no matter the cost. People might call me overly cautious, but they don't know what lurks on those deserted roads late at night. They don't hear the soft rattles and murmurs coming from inside the tanker. They haven't seen the shadows that materialize near its reflective surface when the rules are stretched too thin. I keep telling myself that one day, I might uncover the truth about what lies in the depths of that steel container. But for now, I'm content to follow the rules. They might be the only thing holding back whatever's inside, whatever it is that demands this specific set of commands. Every time I climb into the driver's seat, I feel tension in the air, like I'm not alone in that cab. There's a dormant energy waiting, ready to stir if I dare to break the carefully laid guidelines. Whether it's an experimental creation or something else, I'm not sure I want to find out. I'd rather stay safe, keep my eyes on the road, and park this beast well before the witching hour. Until the company no longer needs my services, I'll keep driving. I'll keep believing that as long as I obey, I'll remain on the right side of that thin line between mystery and calamity. After all, a job is a job, and this one pays well, if I can live long enough to enjoy the rewards. Looking back on it all, the simple truth remains: I drive a fuel tanker, and these rules are the only reason I'm still breathing. Thanks for watching. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button and subscribe for more eerie creepypastas. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.